A judge thought he was being clever by playing truth or lie with a 12-year-old girl. But she turned the courtroom upside down. The courtroom in Toledo, Ohio, was colder than it needed to be. Not just from the blasting air conditioning, but from the way people stared at Amani Jefferson. She looked like something fragile, like a porcelain figure behind glass. She sat perfectly still, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore her yellow sweater, the one she always chose when she was nervous. Her foster mom had ironed it the night before, even though Amani had told her not to. But it didn't matter. Nothing about today felt normal. At 12 years old, she stood barely 5 feet tall. Her bright brown eyes scanned the room with a calm far too deep for her age. The courtroom was only half full. A few reporters lingered in the back, notebooks ready. Some social workers sat scattered around the room. On the left side of the gallery were her foster parents, Deborah and Stan Greer. They looked tense, holding hands, their eyes locked on Amani. Across from them sat a woman with tight curls and a stiff red jacket. She clutched a tissue in one hand and a worn folder in the other. Celeste Boone. Amani had only met her twice, once during a supervised visit, and once at a noisy diner where Celeste spent most of the time arguing with the waitress about how cold her fries were. Now, here she was, hoping to take Amani home. But Amani had other plans, and a truth the courtroom wasn't ready to hear. Amani didn't want to be here, but she knew exactly why she was. Judge Gerald Norwood, somewhere in his 60s, sat high on the bench with reading glasses dangling from a cord around his neck. He looked like he'd done this 1,000 times, because he probably had. Still, the way he eyed Amani made her feel like a misplaced chess piece. "Miss Jefferson," he said, shuffling through a stack of papers before leaning forward, "I know this is unusual. Letting a child speak in a custody hearing isn't something I do lightly." "I understand," Amani replied, her voice calm and clear. Norwood raised his eyebrows, caught off guard by her composure. The courtroom had braced for tears, stumbles, maybe silence. But Amani didn't fidget, didn't glance nervously at the walls. She just sat there, waiting, steady, focused, as if she'd practiced this moment in her head 100 times. A hush fell over the room, just the faint hum of air conditioning, a cough from the gallery, the soft click of a pen. Someone's phone buzzed once before they quickly silenced it. Norwood cleared his throat. "You seem pretty sharp," he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "I bet you do well in school." "I do all right," she answered. He chuckled. Modest, too. Then he paused, letting the silence stretch a beat longer than necessary. "Tell me something, just for fun," he said. "Ever sneak a cookie before dinner?" Amani tilted her head slightly, not smiling, just watching him with those too-old-for-12 eyes. She considered the question carefully, as if it were more important than it seemed. "That's a leading question, Your Honor," Amani said, tilting her head slightly. "You're assuming I have, not actually asking if I did." Someone in the courtroom stifled a laugh. Even the court reporter looked up, surprised. Judge Norwood raised his eyebrows, clearly not expecting that. "Well then," he said, shifting in his seat, trying to regain control. "How about we play a little game? I'll ask a few questions. You just say, truth or lie." Amani glanced around the courtroom, the social workers, her foster parents, Celeste, then turned back to the judge and gave a single, slow nod. "Okay," she said, "but I might ask some questions too." That made the judge pause. "Fair enough," he said with a cautious smile. But the moment he asked his first question, he began to understand. This wasn't going to be a game. Amani wasn't here to play. She was here to shift the ground beneath their feet. Norwood leaned back, trying to keep things light. Maybe he thought he was being clever. Maybe he was just trying to ease the tension. Either way, he peered at her over his glasses and asked, "All right, Miss Jefferson. Truth or lie? You've stayed up past your bedtime more than once this week." "True," Amani said, without missing a beat. "But I was reading the Family Law Journal of Ohio, 2022 edition." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Quieter this time, less amused, more confused. Judge Norwood squinted at her. "Is that so?" "Yes, sir," she said. "Page 147, subsection B. I wanted to understand how the state defines best interest of the child." The courtroom fell silent again. This time, no one laughed. "Family Law Journal, huh?" the judge asked, half incredulous. "Yes, sir," Amani said. "It's free to read online." "That's so?" "That's where I learned custody cases are supposed to be decided, based on what's in the child's best interest." Judge Norwood cleared his throat and straightened up in his chair. "All right, then. Let's try another one. Truth or lie, you've skipped school by pretending to be sick." "Lie," Amani answered firmly. "I haven't missed a day since 3rd grade." That was when Benjamin Rohr, Celeste Boone's attorney, leaned forward. He wore thick glasses, his hair slicked back like a courtroom anchor from the 90s, and he had the kind of over-polished confidence that usually got results. Until now. "Your Honor," he interjected, "if we could return to the matter at hand." Norwood raised a hand without looking away from Amani. Rohr stopped mid-sentence and sank slightly back into his chair. Something in the judge's expression had shifted. He wasn't just humoring a child anymore. He was listening. Norwood adjusted in his seat, then said, "All right. My turn's over. Go ahead, Miss Jefferson. Ask me one." Amani paused. Her fingers tightened slightly around the hem of her yellow sweater. "Truth or lie," she said, her voice even, steady. "You've already decided who I should live with." The air went still. Someone in the back cleared their throat, then thought better of it. Even Rohr leaned back, silent. Norwood's face didn't change immediately, but after a long moment, he let out a quiet sigh, almost too soft to hear. He looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time, Judge Norwood didn't see a child on the stand. He saw a witness. "Truth," Judge Norwood said. Amani nodded. "I figured." She turned to face her aunt. Celeste straightened in her seat, feeling the shift in attention like a spotlight. "Truth or lie?" Amani asked calmly. "You told the caseworker you could take better care of me than the Greers, because you earn more money." Celeste blinked, caught off guard. "True," she said slowly. "That's a fact." "Then why do your electric bills show 4 late payments in the last 6 months?" The air tightened. A soft gasp moved through the room like a ripple in still water. Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it again. Without a word, Amani reached into her small canvas bag and unfolded a sheet of paper. "Public records," she said. "I looked them up last week at the library. It's all there." Rohr shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely out of line." "It's relevant," Norwood said, not raising his voice. "Sit down, Mr. Rohr." Amani's voice stayed steady. "Truth or lie," she said, turning back to the judge. "A child's voice should matter when deciding their own life." Norwood looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Truth." Amani exhaled, quiet but deep, her fingers finally loosening in her lap. "Then I'd like to speak," she said. "For real." "Not about cookies or games," Amani said. "Just the truth." The judge nodded once, The game was over. The adults were no longer in control. The court clerk jotted something down. The stenographer's keys clicked steadily. Judge Norwood sat upright, then motioned gently with his hand. "You may speak, Miss Jefferson." Amani took a breath, not because she was scared, but to organize her thoughts. She wasn't like most kids, checking for reactions or searching for words. She was exact. "I've lived in 6 homes in 7 years," she began, her voice even and sure. "Some were okay. One had a dog that chewed my socks. One smelled like onions and baby powder. One locked the fridge after 5 p.m. She paused. No drama, no trembling lip. Just facts. "But the Greers," she said, glancing toward them, "they're different. They didn't ask about my past. They asked what I like to eat, what books I read. They didn't treat me like a case file." Deborah Greer wiped her eyes, silent tears sliding down her cheek. "They taught me how to braid my hair without breaking it. They asked what kind of music I liked. They let me paint one wall in my room yellow." Amani looked back to the judge. "I know I'm just a kid, but I'm also the one who has to live wherever you send me. Shouldn't I get to feel safe there?" The room was still. Even the air conditioner seemed to quiet for her. Stan held her hand gently under the table, trying to stay composed. Amani turned to her aunt. "Mrs. Boone, you told my caseworker you should have custody because we're family, but you didn't visit me until the court got involved." Celeste shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm not mad," Amani added quickly. "I'm just saying I've had to take care of myself for a long time, so I know the difference between someone who shows up because they want to and someone who shows up because they have to." Judge Norwood tapped his pen thoughtfully, but didn't say a word. Amani leaned forward just a little, steady and composed. "Do you want to know why I started reading about family law?" she asked. The judge gave a small nod. "Because people kept making choices for me. Without me. Grown-ups in rooms like this one saying things like, 'She's too young to understand,' or 'She'll adjust.' But I do understand. More than you think." Her voice remained calm, but softer now. "I know what it feels like to be safe. I know what it feels like to be afraid. And I know when someone is lying, especially when they're smiling while they do it." The room was quiet again. "This isn't just about who wants me," she said. "It's about who knows me, who sees me." She glanced at the Greers, her voice warm. "They know I hum when I read. They know I only eat strawberries if I can pick the green tops off myself. They notice when I'm pretending to be okay. They ask what kind of day I had, and actually wait for the answer. They know I eat my pizza crust first," Amani said, her voice steady. "They know I collect old bus passes and keep them in a shoebox, because it makes me feel like the places I've been actually mattered." The words hung in the silence, heavier than anything that had come before. Across the room, Roar leaned over and whispered something to Celeste, but she didn't respond. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Norwood spoke. "How old were you when you learned to read legal papers?" Amani didn't flinch. 9. I started with eviction notices." Judge Norwood stared at her. Something softened in his expression. Not pity, but recognition. He drew a breath, then sat back in his chair. "All right, Amani. Thank you. That was helpful." She nodded once. "I'm not done." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not?" "No, sir. I want to talk about one of the court documents in this case. It has false information." A quiet ripple passed through the courtroom. Roar straightened sharply. "Which one?" the judge asked, suddenly serious. Amani reached into her bag again and pulled out a paper, folded neatly. "This one, Filed by Celeste Boone. She wrote that she has a 2-bedroom apartment. But this lease, she held it up, says it's a 1-bedroom. She let that settle for a second. That means she'd have to turn the living room into a bedroom. No door, no privacy. Celeste's face flushed deep red. That was a mistake, she muttered. Amani didn't push further. She didn't need to. She simply added, I just thought the court should have the full truth. It's not just that, Amani said, cutting in gently but firmly. The lease is dated 2 weeks after she filed the court paperwork. Judge Norwood's eyes narrowed. Is this real? Yes, sir. The building manager let me see it. I told him I was checking housing details for court. I used my school ID. Silence fell, dense and full. Not uncomfortable. Just still, like the room itself was holding its breath. Amani didn't move. The lease sat in her hands. She wasn't smug, not proud. Just certain. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. And that mattered more. Across the room, Celeste crossed her arms, tight against her body. Her eyes flicked to Roar, who looked far less confident than before. He leaned in, whispered something. This time, Celeste barely nodded. Judge Norwood rubbed his temple with the back of his pen as he studied the paper. Ms. Boone, he said at last, his voice measured. Is anything in this document inaccurate? Celeste paused. Number. But I didn't mean to mislead anyone. I just didn't think it would be a problem. She hesitated. I've made a space for her, with a curtain dividing the bed from the kitchen. Amani's voice was soft, more curious than angry. A curtain? Celeste exhaled sharply and looked away. That was the thing about quiet. It left no place to hide. Silence didn't always mean guilt, but sometimes it spoke louder than any admission. Judge Norwood cleared his throat and shifted slightly. Amani, he said, you've clearly done your research. You're sharp. But what about the emotional side of this? Isn't it possible your aunt deserves a chance to rebuild a connection with her family? Amani nodded thoughtfully. Yes, but rebuilding doesn't mean tearing things apart. It means showing up, calling, visiting, sending a card, when there's no court date involved. That landed harder than she meant. Celeste's lips parted, like she might argue, but nothing came out. Amani continued, voice steady. I know people always say, family comes first. But water keeps me alive. Not just names or blood. I don't need people who look like me. I need people who see me, who understand. That was when Deborah broke. Not quiet tears, but full-on, raw sobbing. Stan reached over and pulled her in. Across the courtroom, Roar stood abruptly. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is turning into an emotional performance, not a legal hearing. I understand the child is articulate, but this isn't about speeches. It's about facts, about ability. Norwood didn't even blink. She is presenting facts, Mr. Roar, he said calmly. You just don't like who's delivering them. Roar sat down slowly, lips pressed tight. Norwood didn't even glance at Roar. He just sighed. Amani sat back, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Calm now. Clear. May I ask one more thing, Your Honor? She said. Norwood gave a quiet nod. Truth or lie? She asked. Have you ever had to grow up before you were ready? He stared at her. No answer came, just a long, slow blink, and a glance down at the papers in front of him. But Amani didn't need words. His silence was loud enough. Outside, the sun had begun to lower. Late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, stretching across the courtroom floor like it was reaching for something, anything, to hold on to. Amani wasn't trembling anymore, but the stillness felt heavier now. Every pair of eyes in the room was on her, not in pity or judgment, but in quiet recognition. And still, it took more than it gave. Judge Norwood leaned forward at last, resting both elbows on the bench. His earlier tone, measured and polite, was gone. What remained was steadier, more deliberate. "Miss Jefferson," he said, "I have to make a decision that weighs your future, emotionally, financially, and physically, not just who speaks well or who made the best case in this room today." "I understand," Amani replied, "but I needed to speak today, not to win, but because sometimes the truth gets buried in paperwork. People forget there's a real person behind the file." Celeste slowly stood, the first time since the hearing began. Her voice was soft but steady as she faced Amani directly. "I didn't come sooner because I didn't know how," she said. "I wasn't ready to take care of anyone. I was still figuring out my own life." Amani nodded once. "I know. That's why I'm not angry. I just can't afford to be someone's practice run." Silence fell again, the kind that made the room feel too big, even if you weren't the one on trial. Roar looked like he wanted to speak, but stayed quiet. Maybe because he knew nothing he said now could rewrite what had already been spoken. Judge Norwood turned to Deborah and Stan. "Mr. and Mrs. Greer, would you like to say anything?" Deborah shook her head gently, eyes shining. Stan cleared his throat, voice low and rough. "We came ready to fight for her," he said. "But she didn't need us to. She fought for herself. And that tells you more about who she is than anything we could have said about who we are." His words lingered in the room, heavy, true, undeniable. Norwood looked back at Amani. "You've read a lot of legal papers, right?" "Yes, sir." "Then you know this doesn't end today. I'll need time to review everything, meet again, and make sure it's done right." "I know," she said, rising slowly. "But now, at least, you really see me. That's all I wanted." She picked up her bag, slipping the lease paper inside like it was just another school assignment. But it wasn't. It was something more. A shift. A mark in time. Whether the adults in the room admitted it or not, something had changed. With quiet, steady steps, she walked back toward the gallery. Not hurried, not uncertain. And no one in that courtroom would ever see her the same way again. The judge called a recess, but no one moved right away. The air felt heavy, like standing too fast might shatter something fragile. Judge Norwood exited through his side door. The clerk followed. The only sounds left behind were the creak of a chair and the soft scratch of someone's pen. Amani sat down between Deborah and Stan. Small between them, yes, but somehow taller than everything else in the room. Deborah leaned in. "You okay, baby?" Amani nodded. "Yeah, just tired." Stan let out a soft chuckle. "You questioned 3 adults and dismantled a legal claim in under 20 minutes. That would wear anyone out." Amani gave a small, worn smile and looked down at her hands. "Do you think he'll send me away?" Deborah opened her mouth, but Stan spoke first. "No one's sending you anywhere without a fight. And after what I just saw, you fight better than most grown-ups I know." Across the courtroom, Celeste Boone sat alone. Her lawyer was off to the side, whispering into his phone. Celeste stared into her purse like she expected it to give her answers. After a long pause, she stood and walked slowly toward Amani. "Amani?" she said softly. Deborah's posture stiffened, but Amani looked up. "I want to say something," Celeste continued. "Not because I think it'll change the outcome. Just because I should have said it a long time ago." Amani tilted her head slightly, listening. "I wasn't ready," Celeste said. and I lied because I thought pretending I had it all together mattered more than telling the truth. But you made me realize the truth matters more, even when it's the hardest thing to say." Amani stayed quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Why do you want me?" The question landed with weight. Celeste blinked, caught off guard, reaching for the right words. "Because I didn't want my sister's child to grow up thinking no one in her family cared." Amani's voice was steady. "That's not the same as wanting me." Celeste nodded slowly. "I know." Deborah reached for Amani's hand, but didn't pull her close. This moment didn't belong to her. Celeste added, "If the court decides you stay with the Greers, I'll respect that. But I'd still like to visit. No court order, no pressure. Just you and me. When you're ready." Amani studied her face like it was a contract she wasn't sure she should sign. She took her time, then finally said, "We'll see." Celeste stepped back, giving her space. Later, in the hallway, Amani stood beside Kendra Lawson, the caseworker. Mid-30s, with glasses that never stayed up, and a calm voice that rarely rose above a whisper. She'd seen a lot of hearings, but not many like this. "You did something rare in there," Kendra said gently. Amani shrugged. "I just told the truth." "Yeah," Kendra replied, "but you didn't use it like a weapon. You held it up like a mirror and made everyone really look." Amani glanced at her. "Isn't that how it's supposed to work?" Kendra nodded, her expression shifting, less caseworker now, more witness to something honest. By the time they stepped outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. And that mattered. What came next wouldn't just depend on the court. It would depend on Amani, too. 2 weeks later, the ruling came in a plain white envelope. No seal, no ceremony, just Amani Jefferson typed cleanly on the front. Inside, the judge's words were simple and final. Permanent guardianship granted to Deborah and Stan Greer. There was no applause, no parade, just a quiet afternoon around the Greers' kitchen table in their small Ohio home. Amani sat between them, reading every line twice, then once more, just to be sure. "I guess this means I can stop packing my bag every night," she said softly. Deborah placed a hand on her shoulder. "That bag can stay empty, baby. You're home now." Stan lifted his glass of orange juice. "To the girl who beat the system, with truth and a tote bag." They all laughed. A real laugh this time, the kind that didn't echo off courtroom walls. Amani smiled, but her eyes stayed steady, thoughtful. She wasn't just relieved. She was ready. "Can we still visit Aunt Celeste if she wants to?" "Of course," Deborah said. "You decide what those visits look like. This isn't a wall. It's just the door you walked through." Amani nodded. She didn't need revenge or a perfect apology. She just needed steadiness. And now she had it. Weeks went by. The tote bag stayed tucked under her bed. The shoebox that held her bus passes filled up more each day. Then, one afternoon, she handed Judge Norwood a handwritten letter through Kendra at a community event. It read, "Thank you for not treating me like a kid who talks too much. Thank you for listening when it mattered. I hope more kids get to speak for themselves, not just be spoken for. Also, I was serious about the cookies. I really never snuck one. No signature, just Amani. And that was it. Not a tale about a girl who found a home, but a story about a girl who knew what a home looked like and spoke up until someone finally listened. The truth. Kids don't need us to speak for them as much as we think. They just need us to hand them the mic and step back. Kids like Amani are everywhere. In classrooms, courtrooms, group homes, and quiet corners of the world where no one asks what they think. But they notice. When they speak, we owe them more than applause. We owe them respect. If you're a teacher, parent, social worker, judge, or anyone who interacts with young people, ask them. Listen like it's the most important thing you'll do that day, because it probably is. And if you're a kid like Amani, don't wait for permission to speak your truth. Speak it, even if your voice shakes. Especially then.